Okay, that's the dumbest intro ever. I'm RSK, and I want to talk about world building, particularly the world building from my novel and what's going to be a series, The Adventures of Hemera in the Galaxy of the Future. Right? Yeah, you've all seen it. I'm making a new cover. So, one of the fun parts about writing a novel is world building. It's, well, for most of us, it's a little too easy to get lost in the world building. It's a little too easy to mistake world building for story. And I mean, if the genre is science fiction, it doesn't tell you anything about what the story is about. It just tells you about the setting and the world. So naturally, especially as a sci-fi fantasy author, it's difficult to pull back from world building and maintain just enough world building for which the story can come through, as opposed to info dumps and taking 2 chapters to describe a fictional, galactic economic system and things like that. Trust me, I wanted to, but that's not the story, right? And also, one of the nice things is that, like in science fiction, I'm a huge science fiction and fantasy fan my whole life. Big Star Wars nerd. I used to be anyway. When it comes to writing your own book and your own story, you have an opportunity to rectify and address the pet peeves you might have in the genre that you're writing in. For example, the X-Wing. I couldn't find, I'm sure I have a couple around the house, I couldn't find any. I don't need to show you what an X-Wing looks like. You know what an X-Wing looks like, right? It's got the central thing, and then it's got the X-Wings, and like all Star Wars spacecraft, it's got really big engine in the back, right? Big old boosters in the back, nothing up front. Classic design. We all love a good X-Wing. The problem is, 1977 audiences didn't have our experience and understanding of how travel in space works. The X-Wing in the Star Wars franchise, their fighters and their battles are based on World War II dogfights. They're based on aerial combat. So you'll have an X-Wing come in, and then it'll go, right? And if you look at it, you're like, how does it do that? Because if it's this way, and then all the engines in the back, then how's it curve like that without having other engines pushing down left and right? These are the kind of little pet peeves that I kept in mind when I was designing, for example, Hemera spaceship, the Sparrow. I know it's kind of hard to see. I made a quick mock-up with modeling clay a while ago. But the main thing is, I wanted to address this idea of momentum in space. So let me back up for a second. Everyone talks about sci-fi in terms of hard sci-fi or soft sci-fi. And to be clear, The Adventures of Hemera, it's a adventure novel. I wouldn't even say it's science fiction necessarily. Its setting is science fiction, but it is a adventure novel. So clearly I come down on the side of quote-unquote soft sci-fi. However, there are very specific scientific things that we know today about space travel and particularly about interactions with alien biology that I wanted to keep and play up as part of the storytelling. So, knowing what we know now about how momentum works in space, it doesn't make any sense to have, the Sparrow does have a big engine in the back, but what separates this from an X-Wing is that it bends. The Sparrow is a spaceship that can bend. I'm going to break this now because I didn't build it right, but it's fine. It's just modeling clay. It bends on these hinges all the way around. So when she's flying, she can literally just bend the engine under her. And then it has 4 little side thrusters where she can adjust laterally. So she's flying straight, and then she can curve it around while also curving that way. It's a very fast, dynamic way of shifting the primary engine around to adjust momentum on the fly. The next one, I'll use something other than modeling clay to build the next model. So for me, I think that's really cool. I love the Sparrow. I love the idea of a spaceship that has two hinges that can bend dynamically in order to make a fun, what would be an X-wing TIE fighter dogfight, but in a much more realistic way because the ship itself is adjusting how it's using its propulsion. So that was my way of addressing a pet peeve on a very outdated idea of what a spaceship is and what a spaceship can do, especially taking in momentum and all these other concerns that we know all about now, but they didn't know about back in 1977. And when I say I'm sort of picking and choosing which realistic scientific parts, right? Obviously, fast and light travel, not scientific at this point, but necessary if your character is going to explore the galaxy of the future. So I didn't particularly feel any need to come up with a elaborate technological excuse for what is effectively magic. There is some science on how gravity tunnels work, but I'm only going to reveal that information when it's part of the story. It's part of what's going on with her. I don't info dump all that up front so that you know when she pushes a button, she goes from point A to point B real fast. It kind of doesn't matter, at least not for the story that I'm writing. By way of contrast, however, a very important plot point in this book, in this series, in terms of the main character's journey, is loneliness and isolation. And loneliness and isolation is expressed primarily through her spacesuit and through the sterilization process that she has to go through every time she goes in and out of any other place where other alien biology may have been. As we know more now, not necessarily back in the 70s, being exposed to alien life is potentially catastrophic. A single alien microbe, we have no idea what it does, how it works. An alien microbe, one alien microbe, could obliterate the entire planet. We don't know. Talking about invasive species, right? Maybe it'll die in a hostile environment it's not used to. Maybe it takes over completely and utterly ruins the planet. This is a concern for the galaxy of the future. So everywhere she goes, when she goes in and out of her ship's cockpit, in and out of rest pods, anywhere where she removes her suit and takes that protection away from her, for her protection and for the other people's protection, there's always a sterilization process that happens very quickly, but effectively and a little magically, just to make sure that there's no cross-contamination, because she could just die from tracking a little microbe into her spaceship if she's walking around an alien planet. And the reason I made this choice, instead of just having her to be able to take her helmet off anytime she wants, is because I really wanted to reinforce these layers of separation she has as a space traveler and why eventually she develops this desire to find the Earth. Because, yeah, it does bother me a little bit, especially in the Star Wars and Star Trek universes where people just sort of roll up to any old alien planet and they're wearing their comfy clothes and they're eating the food and drinking the whatevers, and everyone's like, yeah, it's all good. It's like, oh, no, everybody would be dead a long time ago if this was actually the case. And for those stories and those environments, that works for them for the most part. But for this series in particular, if she could just take off or not even wear a spacesuit, and if she could just eat and drink wherever she went, then that isolation and desire to find the Earth wouldn't be as intense as it becomes. So using realism where appropriate to further the story was always the goal of the world building of this universe. It's a deliberate choice to ignore a lot of other practical concerns, deep space radiation. I have a little bit about why she doesn't get deep space radiation poisoning, but there's all sorts of other things that would render this story impossible in a realistic sense. But those don't have any bearing on the story, so I mitigate them through science fiction, and then the science realism that I bring in is only to accentuate and provide a groundwork for the story that I'm telling. So that's my approach to storytelling.